I'm excited to announce a new solution from H2K Labs, Revved Up. Revved Up is an invitation-only gathering and a brain trust for CEOs and their revenue-critical C-suite teams leading multi-sided businesses such as media, events, data and insights, marketplaces, and professional networks. So if you're a CEO or a C-suite leader interested in improving how your business is extracting maximum financial return from your most valuable asset data, then Revved Up is for you. Revved Up for CEOs and C-suite leaders takes place February 25th through the 27th in Sarasota, Florida. Please visit h2klabs.com/revvedup to learn more, and that's 2 V's. Welcome to the Revenue Room, where we explore strategies and insights from CEOs and revenue-critical C-suite executives who are leading businesses in the information and data economy. I'm your host, Heather Holst-Knudsen, CEO of H2K Labs and the founder of Revenue Room Connect and the Revenue Room podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Orson Francescone, Managing Director of FT Live, the global events business of the Financial Times. Under Orson's leadership, FT Live achieved record-breaking performance year over year in 2023 and 2024. In 2024 alone, FT Live produced 240 events and hosted 3,500 speakers and 86,000 attendees. I'm thrilled to have you here, Orson, and truly appreciate you taking time to speak with me despite your incredibly busy schedule. Welcome.
Thank you, Heather. It's great to be here. I'm very excited, and thank you for the invitation.
So let's start with your background. I typically do a deep dive bio when I introduce my guests, but when we spoke preparing for this discussion, I said to myself, I think Orson is a much better conveyor of your track record. You've worked in so many of the illustrious event organizers. Tell us about your journey.
Well, thanks again, Heather. Well, this year actually marks my 20th anniversary in the industry, which does make me feel a little bit old. But I walked through the doors of a company called Euromoney Institutional Investor 20 years ago. I just graduated from an economics degree, and I needed to pay my rent. And I remember going to all the recruiters and asking them, I need a job. And you're at that stage in your life when you're in your 20s that you'll take any interview, right? And I got sent to this interview, and she said, it's a company called Euromoney Institutional Investor. It's to do with finance, business. It's to do with research. She never mentioned the word events. And so I turned up. I thought I was going for an interview for a research role in a financial services company. And it turns out, of course, it was a media company, which at the time was owned by the Daily Mail Group. It was a wholly owned subsidiary of DMGT. And the interview was for a job as conference producer. So, which is a term we use here in the UK for people who write content to write programs for B2B conferences. And to cut a long story short, I got the job, and in my second week, I was off to New York to research a new conference in the financial market space. And I got thrown into this magical world of B2B media and events. And this was in around 2005, and so which was quite significant because it was a time when obviously magazines, B2B magazines, were transitioning to digital, and they were doing it in a pretty clunky way. A lot of them were not succeeding. It was very messy. And what emerged was that a lot of advertisers started realizing a thing called sponsorship of events. When I started in events, really, sponsorship was a very kind of new thing and small thing. And so I was working for a business model that got most of its revenues from paid delegates. And this was a business model that had been created by Lord Laidlaw and the IIR model back in the 80s and 90s. And he is really the precursor of everything we're doing today, where he'd launched the B2B conference, where people used to pay to attend to go and get information they couldn't get anywhere else. Networking at a conference didn't really exist. Sponsorship wasn't a thing. You built a really critical conference program that you did through lots of research. And so I remember doing about 150 research calls for my first conference and writing all the transcripts of the research calls. And it was built from the bottom up. And then if you had a editorially solid and sound conference program, people would pay to attend that conference because they would be gaining information they couldn't gain elsewhere. Then the internet comes, B2B magazines and communities get disrupted, and a lot of advertising revenue moves over into sponsorship. And so it was really kind of fun time to join the industry. We can go into a bit more detail on the details of that later. I then spent about 10 years at Euromoney working up through the ranks, and then moved to another subsidiary of DMGT, an event company called DMG Events, which organizes is a large trade show organizer. So I moved from conferences to trade shows, and I was running some of the world's largest energy and oil and gas trade shows. I mean, these are events with about 900, 1,000 exhibitors, 50, 60,000 visitors. And the reason they wanted me was because they wanted somebody from a content background to move into trade shows. And you know, people listening will know that content in trade shows is now normal, but 15 years ago it wasn't normal, right? Trade shows were just about selling space and people turning up and filling the aisles. And trade show organizers realized if they could provide some solid content next to their trade show, they would attract senior people in the industry, which would attract exhibitors, which would attract visitors. And so I went on this incredible journey running some huge trade shows, which is, as you know, a different business model from conferences. And I then moved, after a few years there, I moved to a company called Haymarket Media, which is a old school traditional UK B2B publisher in lots of different verticals and sectors. And I was their director of events. And that was a mixed portfolio of conferences and trade shows. And 5 years ago, I got a call from the Financial Times, who was looking for somebody to run their event business. And I guess having started in financial media, I'd left a piece of my heart in financial media, and I got this phone call from the Financial Times, and obviously I had to jump at the opportunity. And so last week marked the 5-year anniversary, really at Financial Times. So that's my journey. Sorry to labor the point of my career, but
No, actually, it's fascinating because so I'm a little older than you. I won't say by
make,
much,
make,
but a
make me feel
little.
a bit younger. Thank you.
But I remember that 2005 period
Mm.
very much, and we in my career, I was always very conference oriented. I didn't
Mhm.
understand trade shows. I was like,
Yeah,
who wants to just go walk around a show floor with a bunch of booths? But
yeah.
anyway, huge business model. So really, it's interesting. So you actually have this part where you entered the conference space when it was taking
It was
off,
taking off, correct.
and you
Yeah,
got the experience for that incredible content creation,
yeah.
which
It
wow,
was really drilled into us. The skill of conference producing was something that was very specific and well defined, and it had been passed down by people who had worked at IIR, then Informa, and then people got dispersed around the other media companies, and the UK and London to this day is still probably the global center of kind of B2B content and conference production. Of course, we've got big players in the US, but that's kind of tends to be dominated by trade shows and associations. But the B2B conference, London, I would argue, is still one of probably the global center. And that skill of researching a conference program from the bottom up
hmm
is something that to this day, and obviously it's changed a lot, the methodology has changed, but the foundations really were laid many years ago, and they were passed down to some of us, I guess.
Well, before I move on to the trade show part, what I noticed, because I worked, I had a brand in US predominantly, but we also were entering the European UK market. The
Hmm.
biggest difference I saw is that in the US, you're right, like the trade shows are typically association run. If you look at the top, 50
Yeah.
trade shows, they're either by an association or in partnership with an association. I mean,
Yeah.
there are few that are independent, but associations have a huge footprint here. On the
Hmm.
conference side,
Hmm.
it's typically media companies that host events, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very unusual, unless it came in from the UK, to have a sole, like just a conference producer that you don't have media.
Yes. Well,
Whereas,
in the
right?
UK, it's not that unusual, right?
Right,
And
exactly.
so the model in the UK, there are still several event organizers that do not have a media brand, and whose model is predicated on immersing themselves in a very very narrow and deep part of whatever segment of the industry they pick, and really using the event as a convener of that particular community. I mean, I remember when we were incentivized on launching new events at Euromoney, and so how do you launch new events? Well, there's got to be a new trend or something new happening, or the new job title was always a great one, right? And so one day a new job title would appear on the Financial Times. I don't know. I remember Chief Data Officer, believe it or not, was a new job title years ago. And so people would jump on new job titles because they know they'd be essentially jumping on a community. And nascent communities need people that convene them, and so conferences are one of the best ways of doing that, right? But the methodology was I remember it was very strict. I remember our manager used to check how many phone calls we'd do, and he'd want to read the scripts, and then presenting the first draft conference program was like a 4-hour meeting where we would go through bullet point by bullet point, word by word, what we'd written. And I'll never forget the one of the criteria was, does it appeal to the fear-greed factor? When somebody reads your bullet point or your session title, is it going to pull at his strings in terms of, I don't want to miss out, and so my greed factor is, if I'm going to miss this session, I'm going to miss out on making money. Or the fear factor, if I miss out on this session, there's a strategic threat to my business that I need to be there to hear what this session is about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember it was a very deep and thorough kind of drilling in of how you write a commercially viable conference program. And then, as I said, then suddenly magazines get disrupted by the internet. Publishers are by and large pretty useless at transitioning to a digital model, and it takes them 10, 15 years to figure it out. Their advertising collapses, and marketers and CMOs realize that instead of spending $50,000 on a one-page ad in a B2B magazine, I can spend $50,000 sponsoring a conference, and I can have 3 of my top executives speaking, and I can invite my clients to the conference, and I can meet new clients, and I can collect business cards, and I can organize a private dinner and a lunch on the side. And so the ROI suddenly of events suddenly goes through the roof, right?
Mm-hmm.
And essentially all of that B2B advertising dollar starts moving into events. But the pie gets bigger because CMOs and marketeers realize, wow, the ROI on this thing is actually quite powerful. And so in a way, the disruption of the internet was a great thing for the B2B event sector.
Well, we're going to talk about more disruption around the corner
Yeah.
already here, but and again, I know the Financial Times does not, it doesn't reveal its financials publicly, but there have been, editorial coverage of the FT Live generating 34 million pounds in revenue in 2024.
Mhm.
Well, um, what's with that said, just with the number of events you're doing and how you're scaling, how do you balance quality? Because you're
Mm.
obviously all about quality with the
Yeah.
scale factor, especially as events, which is hard,
Yeah.
scaling is hard.
Yeah, really good question. So first of all, I won't comment on the number you threw out there. I guess what I will comment is that over the past 5 years, we've been growing at an average growth rate of about 18%. So very aggressive growth,
Hmm.
and it's been incredibly exciting. Obviously, I mean these are kind of startup kind of level of growth rates, which means you're working in a unbelievably fast-paced environment. I mean, events are anyway. When it comes to the FT, the FT is this magical brand that I always say is this incredibly beautiful creature, and it's half B2B and half B2C. If you think of these medieval creatures that have got different heads on them, and the FT straddles these two B2B and B2C media worlds in quite a unique way, right? And so in one way, it's a B2C daily newspaper that you can buy at the newspaper stand, and it still exists in physical format. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's a B2B information service that certain people can't do without because they're getting their news that they need that enables them to do their job on a daily basis, right? And so, the typical definition of a B2B media product is this product going to help you do your job quicker, faster, or better, right? So if
Hmm.
it ticks boxes, then in my mind, that's a B2B media product. And because the FT straddles these two worlds, it allows us to play in lots of different sectors and have quite a unique event business model. Sometimes it's a curse because the temptation is to play in too many sectors and create too many things at at the same time. And so I have a wonderful relationship with our newsroom colleagues, and all of our newsroom colleagues have got amazing ideas of events they'd like to be involved in, right? And so I do spend a lot of my day saying no to ideas as well.
Hmm.
But you can imagine with a brand like the FT, in theory, you can launch lots of different things in lots of different sectors. And we'll get on to our different event models. We also operate quite a complex, I would say, business unit where we play in different types of event models. Primarily, we have two primary business models. We have our own owned event model. So these are the public-facing traditional style conference like the FT Banking Summit, where people can buy a ticket to attend, and we have multiple sponsors sponsoring the event. And then we have what I call an agency model, which is our FT partnership event model, and these are single sponsored essentially private event activations. And that model, they've both been growing very rapidly, but of course the agency model is something that certainly in my days when we started in B2B conferences, we always, and every now and then years ago, we'd get a sponsor saying, you know, could you organize something for us? And we always used to think, no, we're never going to do that. Why would we want to do that? We want to kind of build our own events. Why would we want to, you know, build something private for a client? And of course, as the years have gone by, the needs of the CMOs have evolved, and CMOs want, because they love events so much, they want different types of events at different stages in their journey, right? And so I always try and explain it. If you think of the typical sales and marketing funnel, depending on where you are at on that funnel as a CMO, at FT Live we have a product for you. So if you want top of the funnel activation and you're trying to build lots of leads, then the digital event is still a huge opportunity because it's quick, of easy execution, and the ROI is fantastic, right? We can spin up a digital event in 6 weeks and deliver anything from 1,000 to 2,000 leads to a client. If you're looking for middle of the funnel activation, you know, probably one of our owned public events, and all our events, by the way, since post-COVID, we're one of the few media players that have maintained a hybrid event approach on all our events, and so all our events are still streamed online. And I'm a big believer on this, and we can get back to that if you like. And if you're at the bottom of the funnel, we can organize something like a Michelin star dinner for 10 people, convened by an FT journalist, where essentially a client can essentially have that bottom of the funnel, very intense, high level private activation in a setting convened by the FT. And so in a way, one of the ways our sales team operates is they offer different solutions to our clients depending on their needs, right? And we have many clients that in the same kind of meeting want to activate across the funnel and across the different event models. You know, the only event model I guess we don't offer is a trade show model, but you know, for kind of obvious reasons, but we can get onto that if you like.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So your sales team can go in
Mhm.
and essentially have a 360-degree event solution portfolio to offer, whether it's, hey, you've got a, you know, let's put our contract, our program that we're going to provide you based on our, you know, our solution that, you know, the things we're trying to solve. We'll do some digital events
Mhm.
that are like short form to support
Mhm.
lead generation, FT
Correct.
branded with you as the sole sponsor. You
Yeah.
want to do some bottom of funnel with some of those leads that have really gained some traction. Let's do a Michelin star dinner. To
Correct.
we have an event that sits squarely in your industry where you'll be one of X number of sponsors, but with a highly qualified audience. And oh, by the way, we've got 3 of those coming up, and
Yeah.
here's your event plan
It,
with FT.
exactly that. And you know, a lot of CMOs understand the journey, and so you know, take a new, I don't know, blockchain company or a new SaaS company, and they've got a really clever, nifty solution and a B2B solution, but of course, nobody has heard of them, and they need to generate leads because they're a SaaS company and they're always desperate for leads, and they also need to elevate their brand, right? And so we will give them leads through the webinar solution. We might give them huge brand activation by, you know, their CEOs sitting in public on stage with other CEOs from their industry, pick an industry, moderated by one of our editors. And remember, we also, on our public-facing events, we open our events to all media and journalists. And so we generate a huge amount of news at our events, not just at the FT, but we have other news sources coming to our events. And then maybe 6 months later, as those leads have trickled down through the funnel, we might do a private activation with 10 people, either in a private room or a restaurant or a setting of their choice, really. And marketers love that because they're able to essentially follow the journey of their activation, and they're also able to attribute ROI, right?
I
As you
say
know,
the ROI.
one of the holy grails, right, is attribution. You know, ever since I've been in this industry, you know, this is the thing that everyone goes crazy for. How can we attribute attribution? And so, you know, and maybe you, we've come from the days of £50,000 for a one-page ad in Euromoney magazine, all the way to today, where that £50,000, you know, or the equivalent of, essentially gives you much stronger ROI with much more attribution. And so, and in that sense, and you know, I think we all recognize we're riding an event wave at the moment. It really is the hottest ticket in town when it comes to marketing, and it's a really exciting time to be in events. You know, I have a town hall with my team every week since COVID. We've always maintained the weekly town hall. And I was saying to my teams, like, guys, you guys are working for the probably one of the top media brands of the world, in the top media product in the world. There isn't anything hotter than events at the moment, and it's a really exciting time to be in the sector.
Oh, I absolutely. I have a question
Yeah.
that just kind of came to my mind with the selling approach.
Mhm.
So you have a sales team for FT Live. What
Mhm.
about, does that team liaise with the team that's selling digital and print advertising,
Mhm.
and how does that work?
Yeah, so they're separate teams, and I'm a big believer in kind of keeping those teams separately, because while some great salespeople can sell anything, we know that these products are getting more and more nuanced and complex, right? And the requests from CMOs are getting more and more nuanced and and complex. So having a specialism in selling B2B events, actually, I think is something quite important. And having a specialism in selling advertising today, not advertising 20 years ago, is a real specialism that's driven by technology. And so at the EFT, we're still believers in keeping it separate, but they work very closely together. They have incentives for them to cross-sell on each other, and they have incentives to do package deals for their clients, where essentially they're selling events, advertising, and another digital solution on the newspaper.
Okay.
So I'd say we're separate, but we work very closely together.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah,
And I like I like the fact that you have incentives to
yeah,
encourage the
yeah.
co-selling.
Yeah,
Um,
and you know that when it comes to advertising in the newspaper, event briefs tend to come from media agencies, but you also know that in the event world, actually 99.9% of event revenue is outbound. So we need to go and look for it. There's a whole debate as to why that's the case, but advertising tends to come inbound via agency, and so it's just they are very different worlds essentially.
yeah, and I think there's in many companies the buyer, whether they have an agency for advertising, the buyer is internal.
Yeah.
It's from the actual organization, the brand.
But also
Um,
the buyers of events sometimes often tend to be the practitioners within the business, and the buyers of advertising tend to be the marketeers.
mhm.
And so, in a bank, a head of infrastructure finance will want to sponsor the main infrastructure finance event in the world. Of course, he liaises with his CMO to get the budget or to work on the activation. But we know that advertising tends to come from central marketing budgets. So there's all these nuances as to how you set up a sales team to maximize extracting
Yeah.
value from our clients and serving them in the most efficient way that's possible for them, really.
No, absolutely. Truth. All right. I'm going to move on to the future proofing nature of
Hmm.
events, or now it's the hottest category in marketing. And I think everyone's, again, if you were a tier one event coming out of COVID, the
Hmm.
world's your oyster. I think if you were tier two or three, it was a little tougher. But um, what I've been hearing, and this is you may have a different opinion. So
Hmm.
what we do is we're all about how data and AI fuel revenue growth, profitability, enterprise value, right? So AI is like the hot, new buzzword. And you talked about new
Hmm.
titles. Chief
Hmm.
artificial intelligence officer is the
Yeah,
latest one I've heard.
yeah.
But I've actually heard some CEOs of event companies gloating over the fact that, well, while media may be in trouble, events are AI proof because of the human
Hmm.
element. I find that a little short sighted. So
Hmm.
I'm curious what your opinion is.
Yeah. So by and large, I fall in the camp that I'm very excited about artificial intelligence. Notwithstanding some of the risks, and I think, to be clear, I think Europe is making a big mistake by over-regulating too early. But this is a separate conversation, and so I'm very bullish on AI. I'm very excited by the opportunity. Um, I do tend to agree by and large that in a world of AI, the event product has a special resonance. I mean, even without AI, I believe that to be the case. But I mean, I think how AI plays out is all to play for still. Is it going to be the industrial revolution that we think it is, or maybe not? Certainly the stuff I look at is quite impressive. Not to promote the FT, there's an incredible series of interviews with AI leaders in the world in the FT that's been running for the past 2 or 3 months. If you haven't read it, I really recommend you read it, because it really helps you get your head around what's happening. And every time I read these interviews, I'm like, gosh, this is moving really faster than I thought. So So I think the world of AI is here and it's going to get bigger. And in that sense, I do tend to agree that, interactions that are human or in person or physical, kind of by default, probably make more sense, right? Um, there's a whole argument around artificial intelligence and its use in events businesses, and I still think it's early days on that, and so um, I don't see it as a huge disruptor to the way we run conferences. I mean, I see it as a huge productivity enhancer, and we've got a work stream program at FT Live, which is essentially is looking at, and we're organized by and large as a traditional events company with sales, marketing, operations, and content as our four pillars by and large. And so each of these pillars are tasked this year to come up with productivity enhancing AI applications within their day-to-day work streams, right? Um, and the reality is that the adoption is kind of patchy. You see some real enthusiasts like me and others in the team, and others that are still trying to get their head around it. I think as AI permeates in people's day-to-day lives and jobs, then it'll start permeating into the events. But yeah, I mean, yeah, why are you a bit skeptical on the whole events and AI world kind of narrative?
I'm skeptical about thinking it's not going to have an impact because it's a live event. That's the part
Oh, I
I
see what
get
you mean.
skeptical about
Yeah.
because, I mean, number one, having been in the industry in the 2000 period when Google hit, and especially, my family business was a marketplace for uh, B2B in B2B between manufacturers and suppliers. So we got really hit when Google came,
Mm-hmm.
and it was
Hmm.
actually started in 1898 by my great grandfather. So you want to talk about the lumbering giant? I always say, like, man, that was a Harvard Business School use case study about how that company survived. Thomas
Yeah.
Publishing. Um, this feels so much more disruptive. Like that
Oh,
felt bad, so this feels disruptive. But I think opposite of 2000 where it was all for the media, like negative, like, oh my god, what are we going to do? Like, I find, like, wow, there's so much opportunity. I'm so excited about it. And I think for events, there's the part about the AI that's on the, like the work optimization, right? You guys are already doing that. But I
mhm,
see, if you are a leader, the opportunity, I just tried to write this down to say the opportunity is to grasp and to see how AI can dramatically improve and enhance the customer journey on both
mhm,
the attendee and, let's say, the
mhm,
sponsor side, right? There's just
mhm.
like tons of opportunity. And the risk is if you do not lead
Mhm.
because
Sure.
it's going so fast. So that's my
Yeah.
point of view.
Oh, I think I agree with that. I also think it's going to lower barriers to entry even more. So remember at
Yes.
the start of this interview, the whole, I still remember that spreadsheet with the 120 research calls that I had on my first event. I remember color coding it. I remember calling people back 4 or 5 times to get through to them. The reality is that's going to go, right. And that was quite a big barrier to entry because that meant you had to spend 3 or 4 weeks doing 120 research calls to come up with an editorially sound conference program, and then spend 3 or 4 more weeks and sending hundreds of invites for the speakers to come and speak, right? Well, you can now write a conference. You can get ChatGPT to write an editorially solid conference program in 60 seconds, right?
Hmm.
And that will allow essentially anyone from their sofa at home to say, ChatGPT, please write me a conference program for an event on this topic. And then you can start playing with it. And you can say, I want it to be a better conference program than this one. And you can upload the incumbent and the existing events conference program and see what ChatGPT does, right? And so that's a huge smash to the barriers of entry of the conference world. Now, of course, you still need the brand and editorial credibility when it comes to inviting speakers. But of course, if you present someone with a program that looks pretty impressive, that gives you already like an in to people. It's like, gosh, this program looks quite impressive. I might go and speak at this conference, even though I'm not really sure who these people are, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that's going to bring much more competition to, especially conference players. Trade shows have higher barriers to entry because of the physical infrastructure. But traditional conference B2B people like us, I think that'll be a much more competitive space because essentially you can get AI to bypass those 130 research calls, and that's 4 weeks of really quite intense, grueling work, right, that you used to have to put together.
Absolutely. That's a great point there. So
And now you can spin up a website at, I don't know, $300-400, a relatively decent looking website. You've got your conference program. I guess you're missing your data, but you can start doing some inbound marketing, or you can partner with somebody, or you can buy data, you can research data. Data costs are coming down as well, right? So
Yep.
you've got infrastructure costs that are coming down, websites. You've got the content that's coming down. Now you can argue whether that's, without a big brand, is it going to be as strong? Obviously not. But and then the data costs are coming down, and so as those costs come down, you're going to see a lot more entrants and single entrants, or small ex-conference people from big brands launching their own events, which is something that has always happened, but I think it's going to happen faster.
Yep. No, I couldn't agree more. So
Yeah.
the barrier
So
to
it's kind
entry.
of exciting, but it can be quite disruptive to some incumbent conference companies, because,
Yeah.
I did it, and I said I uploaded, picked a conference, not one of mine, from the leading conference in a particular sector, and I said, asked ChatGPT to write me a conference program that would attract more people to buy tickets than mine. I want it to be better, and I gave it some criteria, and 2 minutes later, it came up with something pretty amazing, right?
Oh, you can do.
So
ChatGPT can write incredible marketing copy.
yeah,
Like it can
yeah,
tell you how to, what the landing page should say. I mean, so all of
correct,
those now are, you don't need people for it for the most part, and
correct.
it's pretty decent.
And so
Um,
you will see those costs coming crashing down in terms of B2B events. You still have the infrastructure costs of hiring a conference place, or a hotel, or whatever it is. But
mm,
I think that's all, by its own nature, it's going to attract more entrants to the industry, which I think is exciting. I love competition, and I love people
yeah,
coming in.
well, it just means you have to be on your toes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
um, and speaking of being on your toes, the way how are you using data to drive
Mhm.
business performance at
Mhm.
FT?
Hmm. Yeah, good question. I mean, so needless to say, I look at data. We look at data every day, right? And so I tend to look at the traditional KPIs on a day-to-day basis, in terms of tracking sales of sponsorship, and delegate revenue and bookings. Um, I kind of live by the same time last year kind of position, and so I can't function if I don't have a same time last year comparison, and then it's a 20-year instinct. Are we ahead? Are we behind? How far ahead are we? How far behind are we? I've got this joke that I always say to marketeers: you've picked the wrong job, because if an event is tracking behind, you need to do more marketing and work harder, and if an event is tracking ahead, you need to do more marketing and work harder to make more money, right? And so
Right.
I always say to my head of marketing, I'm really sorry, but you know what the answer is? You're going to have to work harder and market it harder. And so, but so we track those typical KPIs in terms of revenues and sales pacing, compared to same time last year. We're obviously very careful about costs, and so we track costs very closely as well. Um, and then we track things like visitors to our website, event websites, and those are important to a certain extent. We have an incredibly skilled digital marketing team now. As you know, digital marketing is now a science; it's not an art anymore. And so, these specialisms in marketing are fascinating, right? 10 years ago, the event marketer used to write copy, get a brochure printed, something designed, do a bit of social media on Hootsuite, write a LinkedIn post. Those days are gone, right? And so we now have a digital marketing team, and anytime they present to me twice a year, essentially their presentation is like an engineering degree. It's like numbers and numbers and numbers, and they need to understand Google algorithms. They need to understand what Meta is doing, and so they're completely on top of the technology, and cost per click and cost per acquisition. And so that's a fascinating world in itself. So we track a lot of that kind of performance marketing, has
Hmm.
become a huge part of our machine. And then I track data quite a lot, in the sense of how much data is coming into our organization, how much is being suppressed. Um, are we growing our database at the rate that I'd like to see it grow? Is our database flatlining? Are there too many suppressions? What's happening with our data? So we track that very closely, I guess. But by and large, event businesses aren't complex businesses, right? You've got two revenue streams: it's ticket revenue and sponsorship revenue, and you've got costs which are to do with your, other than below the line, you've got costs that are to do with your venue and your marketing, right? And
Hmm.
so you're
Hmm.
at any one time, you're probably tracking 5 or 6 kind of main items, I guess. And but yeah, and so I hope that gives you an idea of.
No, absolutely. And actually, it leads me a little bit to my next question as relates to data and the synergies between like what's happening on the Financial Time,
Mhm.
FT.com website, right? Because you get
Yeah.
a lot of, there's a lot of, consumer behavior there about topics of interest or trends. Are you a lot, is that the data you're talking about when you're looking at the website, or are you looking at more of the FT Live website?
So I was referring to FT Live, and the data that comes to FT Live eventually does end up in a database that we share with the group, because of course FT Live is now this really important funnel for data to turn into future subscribers, right?
Hmm.
And so we have an amazing data team at the FT. This is a central resource, and they've done some econometric analysis, and they've been able to predict that a subscriber that attends an FT Live event has a higher propensity to resubscribe or to um, roll over their subscription, and a non-subscriber who comes to an FT Live has a higher propensity to buy a subscription, right? And this is kind of it kind of makes sense if you say it, but actually getting it proved kind of on the stats was actually quite powerful, because we can extrapolate that and trend that out over years, and we know how much value events are bringing, not just to FT Live in terms of event profit, but in terms of subscription profit. And so, as the years have gone by, FT Live has become more and more integrated into our not only newsroom operation, but our subscription business. And so we work very, very closely in tracking that flow of data. And so one of the reasons that I was adamant we wouldn't get rid of our digital event transmission, even on our physical events post-COVID, was that we are bringing in every month thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of data that are then funneling through our subscription funnel, right? And so, as you can imagine, the numbers on our digital events are still much bigger numbers in terms of, because digital events, people tend to either attend for free or at a very reduced rate, right? And
Hmm.
so we're bringing big volumes of data into the organization via that channel. And some of them will convert to future FT Live in-person attendees. And so you might decide, gosh, there's an event I'm really interested in. I'm not really sure about this. I haven't been to it. I'm going to watch it online this year. And then by watching it online, you're like, you know what? I can see what's happening in the room, and the content's amazing. I can see the networking is amazing. I can kind of tell, right? And a lot of people then following year become in-person attendees, and obviously they pay a much higher price for that. But at the same time, that data gets sent to our subscription marketing business that then markets to them in order for them to buy a subscription to the FT. So we're very well joined up, and it's a lot of fun being kind of plugged in.
No, that's that cross pollination and that you see that
Yeah,
impact on the funnels on both sides is
yeah.
um, you know it's one, I love hearing that, but two, being able to actually connect those dots. Or some
Mhm.
organizations don't do that, they don't
Yeah.
see the value of this having on this other revenue stream.
And if
um,
you go on ft.com, even if you're not a subscriber, you'll get some sort of free content for a bit. We've now got which kind of sounds simple, but actually it's taken some time to set up. We'll have contextual FT Live ads within stories. So if you're reading an energy story, you will get served up an ad of one of our energy events.
mhm.
If you're reading a banking story, you'll get the banking summit digital ad coming up. Up until a year ago, you'd be getting random ads. You might
Mhm.
read a crypto story, and you'd be getting an ad for FT Live for the Business or Luxury Summit, which had no relevance, right?
Right,
And
right.
so stuff like that is quite exciting. We've got an amazing product and tech team at the FT that can do nifty stuff like that.
No,
And our
excellent.
search function as well, in our search box on ft.com, if you search for, I don't know, crypto or commodities, it'll obviously serve you up all the FT stories on that sector. But further down the line, it'll show you an ad for the event that is relevant to your search, if there's one.
A lot of I wrote a blog about this a while ago, is the difference between personalization and relevance. What's more
Yeah,
important?
yeah, it's a
Relevance.
good point. Yeah,
I'd much
yeah,
rather
yeah.
have someone serve me, as you said, doing a search for crypto, and then, all right, well, even more relevant is, um, I'm a female, I'm looking up crypto, and then you have a summit, female leadership in crypto.
Yeah,
Like, right? Like,
exactly.
I'd be like, oh, I need to go to that.
Yeah.
But I skipped over something that I had
Mhm.
written down that I did not want to skip over, which
Mhm.
is, you are so many event organizers I talk to are they don't get the they're not doing the hybrid approach, right? Live
Mhm.
and then and virtual. Like, it's to get the hybrid. And I
Mhm.
think one is they feel it's like overwhelming from an operation standpoint, cost, they
Yeah,
get afraid of the digital cannibalizing the live.
yeah,
Talk to us
yeah.
about your strategy.
Yeah, well, it comes from far in the sense that 5 years ago, which my joining the FT coincided with COVID, by the way. And as you can imagine, it was a roller coaster of a time. Probably the most intense period of my career. Well, by far the most intense period of my career. And who knows in the future? But I just arrived at the FT, and suddenly I was like, "My God, can you think of anything worse? You're running an events company, and now there's a pandemic." And so I remember thinking, we need to do something to make sure that we stay alive, really. And a lot of you will remember that the FT was the first global media brand to launch a big digital event, and so on the first week of April, if you remember when COVID was of 2020, we launched an event called the Global Boardroom, which was a 3-day event with over 150 speakers, from Tony Blair to Al Gore to every CEO under the sun that you can imagine. And we attracted over 60,000 registrations, and that was like a huge light bulb moment for us, right? And ever since then, that allowed us really to essentially lead the pack when it came to digital events. And so for 2 years, we were essentially the most successful kind of digital event organizer, because also our brand allowed us to do that for obvious reasons, right?
Mhm.
In a way that other B2B brands just couldn't do, or trade shows couldn't transition to digital. If you could have picked an event brand that could have transitioned to digital, the FT probably would have been one, because it allows us to play globally in different markets, and with a conference model which is content rich. And so and so that whole hybrid digital thing comes from far. And so, having been so successful at digital, partly was an instinct. When COVID ended, I remember my head of operations coming into me saying, "Listen, can we drop this digital thing? It's expensive. It's a lot of work. People are back. They just want to go to hotels and resorts, and they're happy meeting and having dinner. And let's just drop the digital thing." And I had to really put my foot down a little bit, because I said, no, this is hugely important for the reasons we've discussed in terms of reach. I always say to people, and I can see who's watching the event, right? I say, we've got people in Papua New Guinea who are watching this event. How on earth, what other marketing channel would we ever consider using to reach somebody in Papua New Guinea? Now that's just a name of a funky country that's far away, right? But in terms of the reach and the value that the FT gets from planting its brand globally, essentially in a relatively cost-effective way, and those costs of running digital events, I'm not saying they're insignificant. A lot of the costs were in acquiring the knowledge as to how to do them, to be honest. And so we now have an incredible team that can do digital events kind of in their sleep, if you know what I mean. They did them through COVID. I remember in the second year of COVID, we ran 300 digital events. It was just kind of crazy, right? And so we've got the know-how and the capability, and clients at our in-person events love it, because, well, a sponsor who's sponsoring their CEO sitting on the stage with our editor at the Waldorf Astoria in New York is loving that, but at the same time is loving the fact that 3 or 4 thousand people are watching from around the world, right? And so, what CMO or marketeer is going to say, "No, I don't like that. I don't like the sound of that"? Of course they like it, right? I've got the people in the room. I've got the people watching from home. I've got the FT sometimes reporting on it if there's news coming out of the conference room. I've got other media outlets reporting from it, and so it's this incredible value that feeds through also our sponsorship revenue, because it's giving added value to our sponsors. And so I'm pretty sure that not many other media brands are still operating a 100% hybrid model. I don't know if we're the only ones, but I'm pretty sure we're kind of like leading the pack on that.
I think I can concur. So actually, in addition to being able to successfully run hybrid events, and which gives you way more expansion opportunity for attendees, get your sponsors more halo marketing effect, building funnel. And I do think people, I
Hmm.
think there's what you said, the person in Papua New Guinea who would just never be able to go to a live event. And now those able to engage with this. But there's also there are, especially the more senior level person, I know what the difference is between the experience with digital versus live, right? So if I'm very convinced and your event's in my sphere and I will go live, but maybe I want to test out the content.
Of
You
course.
give me an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
And you are getting a tremendous amount of data that you can then feed to, again, as a revenue stream, actually,
Mhm.
as you know, it feeds into first party data that you wouldn't have gotten. So I think
Yeah.
it's a huge strategy. And I don't, but the other part that kind of clicked in my head when you were describing this is you're actually becoming expert in production. Like,
Hmm.
not that you weren't already in a live event, but now
Sure.
you're like a TV show. Like you
Yeah.
right? You have
Yeah.
incredible production value that can be repurposed over and over and over again because of the quality of those content snippets, let's say, or shorts.
Correct. And as we were discussing with AI earlier on, we know that the infrastructure costs and knowledge costs of the video industry are crashing down, right? And so, anything from a camera that is in front of me now, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do that. You would have had to, television producers were the only people who could afford TV cameras right now. Now everyone can afford a TV camera. The lights that are here in the studios, they're produced in China and they're probably a tenth of the cost than they were 10 years ago, right? And so that unit cost of production has come down. Um, COVID was a real transformation because it forced us to acquire the knowledge. Again, this is something we would never have done, right? We usually outsource our AV and on our big events. Of course, we still outsource our AV capabilities in the room to third parties, but actually, FT Live will always manage the digital event piece because there's an FT Live way of doing it, because we've acquired the knowledge, and so there's no reason actually to get anyone else to do it for us, right?
Hmm.
And so it's kind of, the unit cost is a lot lower than people think. People think, gosh, let's get rid of this digital thing, it'll save lots of costs. But, if you've been able to perfect it actually and drive the infrastructure cost down, you can do it in a relatively cost-effective way that gives you lots of value.
No, absolutely. All right, I'm going to change gears here. Just go
Mhm.
to this will be my final serious question, but it's a little fun
Yeah.
and a little selfish because one of my favorite things to do in events, and lots of them I love events, but is picking the venue,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, we
especially
all love doing that.
right? Especially for like
Yeah.
CEO type retreat. So my question
Mhm.
is,
Mhm.
a location can make or break an event. Everything
Mhm.
from where it is, the quality of the service, and the
Mhm.
hotel, and all of that, and the perception of the attendee. What
Yeah.
is the best and worst
Mm.
venue decisions you've made, and why?
Gosh. Wow. Well, I mean, remember, when I started at Your Money Institutional Investor, this was an incredible learning school as to how to run a business. Essentially, they used to teach you how to run a P&L at a very young age, but they were unbelievably and laser focused on the bottom line. And so I think that was just part of the culture, and the DMGT kind of family ownership just imbued people with that culture. And by the way, I think it was a great culture because it taught me at an early age how to run a profitable business. But in those days, essentially, gosh, I mean, I can't mention names, but we would run some B2B events in some pretty ropey venues in London, and we'd come home and we'd be proud as like, oh, that's 85% margin on that event. In these days, I would go back and hire some of the venues that I did, probably not. With regards to some of the most beautiful events, well, we're about to run. Well, actually, this is kind of hasn't been announced yet, but we have an event called the Business of Luxury, which is a B2B event about the business of luxury. And so we get CEOs of luxury companies. And as you can imagine, the venue has to be aligned to the luxury sector. So last year we ran the most incredible event in Venice, and it was dispersed around Venice, but we had our gala dinner at Cipriani in Venice, which was just absolutely spectacular. And so I'd say that's probably one of the uh, ones that springs to mind. In 2026, we're going to an incredible location, which I can't disclose. It still hasn't been announced. Which is, I can say it's in Italy, and it was voted the best top resort in the world. And so I came back from a site visit there a few months ago, and I can guarantee you it's an incredible place. But I think you're right. The importance of the venue, gosh, the venue discussions are always complex and complicated, right? And so I always say to people, it's like when you're buying a house, you've got to make trade-offs, right? It's exactly the same as buying a house, right? And I have to explain a lot of this to our journalists in the newsroom, because of course journalists come with their own preconceived ideas. I'd love this event. Can you run it in this venue and that venue? And that the variables and the factors are just so many, right? When it comes to budget and location and the size and the flow and the availability and the budget, and you're trying to manage a
And room
margin
rate, even for
and room rate. and so many considerations, right? But of course, what hasn't helped in the past few years is the skyrocketing of hotel prices. I think that's one of the things that's kind of quite, of all the prevailing, wind in our sails, the venue costs have been quite a really tough one for us to navigate. And as you can imagine, we run our events in five-star venues, primarily in five-star hotels around the world. And you now go to a five-star hotel and it's at least $1,500 a night, and 5 years ago it would have been $350 a night, right?
Yep.
And so completely crazy. And so actually that's been one of the hard things to challenges to navigate. Although there seems to be an acceptance that it's okay to pay $1,500 for a bedroom, which still blows my brains, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the way the hotels have been able to change people's perception and price sensitivity, I think, is pretty incredible, right? I mean, we would never have dreamed of paying $1,500 for like a hotel anywhere in the world, other than a few exceptions, right? And now you only need to walk into the Four Seasons in New York on a busy September weekday, and it's $1,500 to $2,000 a room night, right? So kudos to the hotels, but it hasn't been great for us. But we've been able to manage. But inevitably, you got to pass some of those costs through to your customer.
Yeah, no, I think that kudos to the hotel for personal spending. I think it's not kudos for business spending because these companies have, even if you're the
Correct.
CEO, you know, um, restrictions.
Yeah, and
But
the venue decision is quite important because, of course, when people are paying B2B ticket prices, I don't know, $1,500, $2,000, $4,000, depending on the event, and then they have to add the flight, and suddenly they're adding a real hefty room rate, then it becomes quite a big undertaking. And so,
yep,
we are always very careful because we say, even in the cases where the delegate is paying for the hotel, well, actually, we need to consider, well, what are we asking this person to spend overall? Whether some of the money goes to us and some of those go to the hotel. Ultimately, in the client's head, it's like, well, I'm spending $5,000 for 2 days to
yeah,
go to this event, so it bloody be better worth it, or otherwise I'm not going to be able to justify it, right?
absolutely, absolutely. All right, so I always like to end with what I call rapid fire questions,
Yeah,
and this is more a
I like it.
personal one. And
Sure.
what is the most unusual and or interesting place you've ever traveled to?
Oh gosh. Well, at the moment, I've got a love for Buenos Aires in Argentina. I've been back 5 times, and so if you haven't been, I highly recommend it. It's this
Okay.
beautiful mix of European splendor and grandeur and architecture, wonderful people and amazing food, and so that's top of my list at the moment. Unusual, gosh, I've been to many unusual places. I guess. I might have to come back to you on that. I guess some deep places in the Far East, where I was traveling backpacking years ago around India. I guess slightly unusual, but beautiful as well, right?
Yeah,
And so,
yeah, for
yeah.
sure. I've heard a lot about India. All right, my last question is, what's the best book you've ever read? And it can be business or
Uh,
for personal pleasure.
it's a book called Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. So if you haven't read it, he was a Nobel-winning economist,
Yep.
and it's a book that I read in my first year at university, and it really kind of stayed with me, and it formed a lot of my views, and also how I think about running businesses.
Well, we're actually going to launch a book club in Revenue Room Connect, the professional network that I'm
Mhm.
launching, and so we'll put that there and say it's
Thank you.
Orson's selection.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was
Thank
a
you, Heather.
pleasure, really fun conversation,
And
as
best
you
of luck with your
promised.
event. Best of luck with your conference that's coming up.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks so much. All right, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll say adieu. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Revenue Room.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'm excited to announce a new solution from H2K Labs, Revved Up. Revved Up is an invitation-only gathering and a brain trust for CEOs and their revenue-critical C-suite teams leading multi-sided businesses such as media, events, data and insights, marketplaces, and professional networks. I launched Revved Up for a few reasons. The first one is I'm extremely passionate about empowering our industry to write the rules versus ceding business value to tech platforms. And with AI no longer an on-the-horizon situation, it's here to stay. And with threats abounding, it's time for us to turn those threats into opportunities and to establish the rules of the game versus being told what to do. The second reason is there's clearly a gap in the market for events as an industry, and I want to fill that gap.
We need new faces in the room, we need future-forward serious discussions, and we need cross-industry and cross-functional convergence. And most importantly, we need to take this discussion from 50,000 feet down to 10 and 5,000 feet. It's time for the conversation about data and its role in driving significant and sustainable enterprise value to take center stage. This discussion should leave you neither confused nor bored, but instead equip you and your teams with actionable strategies and playbooks to implement back at the office. It's about making existing revenue streams better, improving profitability, launching new revenue streams, and creating defensible competitive advantage. It's about CEOs helping CEOs learn how to navigate this increasingly complex race course. According to Gartner, 86% of CEOs believe AI will maintain or grow company revenues and enterprise value over the next 3 years, yet they do not know where to strategically focus their efforts. I hear this all the time when we talk to clients. That's where we come in. At Revved Up, we'll dive into how to fuel enterprise value, as well as to create sustainable competitive barriers to entry. Revved Up for CEOs and C-suite leaders takes place February 25th through the 27th in Sarasota, Florida. Please visit h2klabs.com/revvedup to learn more, and that's 2 V's.